Welcome everyone, and thanks everyone for joining our new 2021 webinar series to assist you understand electrical safety and to mitigate all risk around it. Today's topic deals with how to minimize the risk of loss with electrical safety guidance. And for this, we have special insight from global insurer, Zurich Insurance. I'm passionate about this topic, as in my experience as an asset owner, we really struggle to try to keep up with electrical safety regulations and what really needs to be done to protect our assets. It's my hope that this webinar arms you with more information to protect you and your company, your directors, and your assets from electrical incidents. My name's Kurt Alexander. I'm the founder and CEO of QuickSafety. And I've been around the electrical industry for over 40 years, with 32 of those years here in Australia. It pains me to see that people just accept that all is good and that there are no safety checks for the electrician's work done on your premise. This is what drove me to develop an easy-to-use system that removes risk from everyone: electricians, electrical contractors, the asset owners, and when we talk about asset owners, all the way from residential all the way to oil and gas infrastructure, the directors of those assets, and importantly, the insurance companies, which is why we're closely working with Zurich Insurance to ensure that all their assets are safe and fully compliant. Okay, let's get with it. After the introduction of these wonderful gentlemen from Zurich, who will be presenting today, we'll dive straight into the presentation. We also have Sandra from QuickSafety as our moderator, and she'll be assisting everyone through the chat function. So please ask questions. Make sure you select all panelists and attendees and ask your questions there or through the quick Q&A section. We'll have ample time at the end to answer these questions, even if we have to run overtime. So ask away. Whenever you have that question, make sure and put it in that chat function. The presentation will be available after the webinar, so please feel free to tag, share, and comment. And at the end, we will give a link to a quiz to see if your building is compliant, and also a sneak peek into our next asset management topic. So make sure and stay listening. It's now my pleasure to introduce two of Zurich's finest, Simon and Jesse. So Simon, let's start with you. Everybody meet Simon Palavicini. Now he has over 20 years experience in the risk industry, and his title at Zurich is Principal Risk Engineer. So welcome, Simon. What can you tell us a bit more about what you do and what your title really entails at Zurich?
Thanks, Kurt, and good morning, everybody. The title really is, in my view, just a title. I think it's more about, after 20 or nearly 25 years, I was thinking about that last night, 25 years in and around property protection from an insurance perspective. And I want to make that really clear. I'm not a BCA consultant or anything like that. But I think after 25 odd years, what I have learned is how to guide people towards the right answer that can help them manage their risk from that insurance perspective. And of course, we do touch other areas, particularly compliance, which is something that's dear to your heart.
Yeah, nice. Excellent. That's fantastic, Simon. Yeah, super proud and privileged to have you here with us today, and can't wait for the presentation and to see what you've got rolled out for us today. So thanks very much for being here. Okay, let me introduce to you Jesse Twartz. Now, he has over 7 years with Zurich, and his title now is the Senior Risk Analyst. So welcome, Jesse, and what can you tell us about yourself and what you do and your title here at Zurich? Oops, he's still muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, mate, my apologies. Can you hear me now?
I got you.
It was bound to happen.
Go for it.
It was bound to happen.
It was.
Look,
It's usually me, though.
Look, I've been with Zurich, as you said, 7+ years with the risk engineering team. I'm a bit of a generalist, so I'll do a little bit of everything. It could be wineries, it could be power stations, it's probably wineries, it could be manufacturing, a winery. Pretty much the South Australian business portfolio is what I look after. So very similar to role to Simon, but just a less senior version.
Nice, nice, excellent. No, that's great. Very, very pleased and privileged to have you here as well, Jesse. Thanks very much. Jesse and another colleague of his, Peter from Zurich, and I've been working closely with Zurich now for 4 or 5 months, and doing a lot of interesting, exciting things within Zurich and also within the electrical compliance for all their assets. So that's super exciting. And as everybody sees, we have the highest quality industry experts here to show us, from an insurer's point of view, what they recommend to minimize the risk of claims and what they specifically look at when they go on site. So I'll hand it over to both of you and have at it.
Thanks, Kurt. So let's look at this from the perspective that we have an audience here that is different to our traditional audience. And this presentation that Jesse and I are going to very quickly run through was really pitched towards insurance brokers. So we work in what's called an intermediated business. We deal with insurance brokers. They place their client's business with an underwriting company, be that Zurich or whomever else. So we have this dual function of we have to work with and educate brokers as well as our end customers. So this presentation that we're going to skip through is really a discussion that we had with our brokers as to how we could give them some simple tips to have a conversation. Kurt, let's roll on. I know you're doing the controlling here today. There's the Zurich disclaimer. We're not going to spend too much time on that other than to say that Jesse and I are not underwriters. We don't pay the claims. And my personal disclaimer is I do not know everything. A lot of this material is really our thoughts and our musings. So we're going to talk about electrical safety and consequences, areas of interest, again, from that insurance perspective, management and maintenance systems, and a couple of key takeaways. Thanks, Kurt. So we will explain the consequences. I'm looking a bit sideways because my screen has gone small on me and I don't want to interfere with it right now. So please bear with me on that. But there's nothing like a bit of a challenge to get you through a Zoom meeting. We're going to talk about why electrical safety is important. And I think what I want to say at this point is Jesse and myself and other insurance risk engineers, we're not electrical engineers, we're not qualified electricians. And it's very important to understand that we come from a very general perspective. We work within Zurich technical guidance, which may not always be from a compliance perspective. It comes from that insurance perspective. And that's where we would very often say, look, we think you may have an issue here, or we think we may have a problem. Now go and see somebody who is competent, accredited, licensed. Go and see someone like Kurt to get the real answer. And that's the key thing here. We don't provide that specific advice. So we'll talk about that and some basic tips to talk about electrical safety. Again, key conversation starters. Thanks, Kurt. I'm not going to go through this one. This is really a very basic electrical diagram. We put it into this presentation because we wanted to challenge our brokers to see if they had any technical understanding of what electricity was at all. But I'm not going to go anywhere near this one because Kurt will just destroy me. So if he wants to ask questions of you about that one afterwards, I will leave that to him. This is more our area. Let's look at some of the losses. Retail fires in the UK. 17% of all retail fires come from an electrical source. Office fires, call centres, hospitals, 5%. I think in hospitals, and again, I don't know all the precise terminology, but you have all of these redundant and protected electrical systems, and you've got the red PowerPoint outlets that are the protected systems, of all of these things that Kurt can talk to you in detail about. And yet in the UK, 5% of hospital fires are an electrical ignition source. Couldn't get a dollar figure there from our UK colleagues. Let's look at the US. Industrial manufacturing, 24%. Mercantile and retail, 15%. Residential, It doesn't matter whether it's a residential property, commercial property. The data from the National Fire Protection Association in America, which is the leading fire body in that country, tells us that electrical is the leading, or one of the leading sources of fires. The other one, incidentally, is hot work. That's where you're doing winding and welding and grinding. And Australia, we can't get any numbers, but we can get data on worker injuries there. And I'll leave you to read and digest those figures. But it is a problem in this country.
It's interesting, isn't it, Simon? It's one of those areas I feel like hot works and sandwich panel, there's all these things that come in and out of fashion that particularly the insurance industry gets worried about. But electrical fires are always there. It's always a factor, and it's always sort of one of those discussion points that causes underwriters and asset owners issues and concerns.
Yeah, I do have stats about electrical fires in Australia, and it's up to 20% of all building fires are electrical fires caused by electrical faults and failures. So that is a statistic in Australia here where we live.
Yeah, and Kurt, I think, that would, sorry to talk over the top of you there, Jesse, but I think, Kurt, that would very much align with the figures that we just saw from the UK and the US. And again, I think you would know better than I, but we probably have one of the best electrical safety and regulation regimes in the world, and we still have this experience. So we do have a long way to go. And, I think this slide here, again, we're not going to talk through it. We know people get electrocuted. We know people get injured. But it just highlights, this was a case in Adelaide. It was a retail outlet, and it was an electrician in a roof space working alone. And there's a problem in itself, lone workers. And the poor fellow was electrocuted. And the fire brigade had to remove the roof off the building. They had to take the metal sheets off the building to get this poor guy out. Now, the reason we talk to our brokers about this sort of thing is, firstly, because many of them deal with workers' compensation insurance. They look after liability insurance, and there is a liability exposure here when a person gets electrocuted, be they a worker or not. But secondly, and more importantly, there are all of these unintended consequences that flow from any such event. A person gets injured, they end up in hospital, they end up off sick, they go onto workers' compensation, the family has less income for a while. If the person is unfortunately, a fatality, then all of a sudden you've got a family without income. And all of the emotional and all the other sorts of effects here. So while people like Jesse and myself come from this property protection position, we find it really helpful to talk to our brokers from this human perspective. And that's what we would encourage all of you to think about here. Whatever I'm going to do today in my electrical safety planning or consideration or compliance regimes, if I get something wrong, what's the human consequence going to be? Let the insurance pay the rest, who cares? But we all want to go home. Thanks, Kurt. So these were just some various other incidents, and we're not going to go talk to them through detail, firstly because we're all aware of it, and secondly because, as I said, the screen's minimised on my page and I couldn't read them to you if I tried. But, look, it just demonstrates that electrocution is a real issue in this country. Thanks, Kurt. Now, you're all sitting there going, what on earth is going on here? What's this little mouse got to do with all of these tyres? Well, 20 odd years ago when I was working as a loss adjuster, I looked after an insurance claim in a tyre workshop. Your typical bow repairs or jacks, not that I'm giving any recommendations, or Bob Jane T-Mart. And there was a small electrical fire. The building wasn't burnt down. The fire brigade turned up, they contained the damage. We had an investigation conducted, and it turned out that a rat had got into the building and had chewed through the wiring on the back of the main board. And I think that's not uncommon, is it, Kurt, from my understanding?
No, definitely not. And it's one of those things to where you can't pick that kind of stuff up normally. In past years, you can't pick that up, but that's why we can now pick that up.
So So here we have this incident where a rat has got into the building. Here's the tip: make sure all of your building walls are sealed up. If you've got an old fibro shed, don't leave it with damage at the bottom. Rodents can get in. In the course of the loss adjustment of this claim, $300,000 worth of tyres had the beads taken out of them, the side wall taken out of them, and they were taken to landfill because not one of those tyre manufacturers would warrant a tyre that had potentially been exposed to heat. And they simply said, we are not going to wear the liability risk of a 60-tonne B-double hurtling down the road with one of our tyres on it. So a very small fire claim, $20,000, $30,000 worth of damage, a little bit of smoke damage, blew out to a $300,000 claim, and $300,000 worth of tyres going to landfill. There's an uninsured environmental consideration. This was before the days when we, could turn tyres into road markers and all those things. So again, just an example that we would give to our brokers, unintended consequences. Thanks, Kurt. Stately Manor in the UK, £65 million loss or thereabouts. You can see the pictures there. Little electrical board at the top, in good condition, not so good after the fire, and large loss ensued. All totally preventable. Thanks, Kurt. Transformer fires, thick black smoke. Not sure where this one is, but again, we do have large oil-filled transformers. We do talk to our customers about how to maintain them, and people like Kurt will be the experts, but there are a range of techniques: preventative maintenance, predictive maintenance, dissolved gas analysis, furan testing, all sorts of things that are beyond my ability. But they're very often the forgotten part of an electrical maintenance system. Oh yeah, it's just the transformer, it's the big green thing out there. Is it even ours? Nobody knows. Thanks, Kurt. The photo on the left, this one was taken in Korea. Transformer set on fire on an insured site. Stick a bollard in front of it so the cars run into the bollard rather than the transformer. Simple things. As an asset or a property owner, that might cost you, a few bucks, but it's about mitigating the risk. And this is the sort of activity that Jesse and I do on a daily basis. And everyone will come back and say, oh yeah, that can't happen. That wouldn't happen. That doesn't happen. But it does. It does happen. Thanks, Kurt.
I think it's interesting that you point out as well that often they're owned by SA Power Net. Well, at least in Adelaide, they're often owned by SA Power, Simon. They're not normally the responsibility of the asset owner, unless it's an old site, in which case the site may own it, and you've got that double whammy. You've got people who may not be worried about that day to day, looking after a very old transformer, which is much more likely to fail than a new one.
Yeah. And, look, the level of risk escalates here. So if you've got a small council-owned or electricity authority-owned pad-mounted transformer out the front, they'll probably put a new one in the next couple of days. If you are a large factory or you're out on a mine site and you've got your own large transformers, they can be 12 months to manufacture. It's not something that's off the shelf. They are very much made to order. So again, it's about understanding where you sit in that risk profile. Thanks, Kurt. Oh, we've already moved on. Look, these are photos that I have taken on some of my site visits. I think Kurt would rightly approve of all of those. I think he would say they are best practice. And I do say that tongue in cheek. But there are, and we're going to get to this in the presentation, and Kurt can, talk to us on the appropriate standards and the appropriate rules and regulations. But the photo on the left, all of the double adapters taken in a workplace, that's not actually allowed under our regulations. Is it good housekeeping in the photo on the right? It's not good looking for the cables themselves, but it's also a trip and fall hazard. So we think about these other things besides the pure electrical issue. But if people are walking over these cables day in, day out, Kurt, they're going to suffer fatigue and they're going to, be damaged more quickly than they should be. The photo in the middle, test and tag out of date. I know, Kurt is he's asked us about why we think about test and tag. And I think we should have a chat about that through the course of this webinar. But I think it's important that we do think about test and tag. And my reasoning would be this. Many years ago, when I was working at another insurance company, they had a large warehouse loss in Sydney western suburbs, over $20 million fire claim. The building was destroyed in part. Now, the fire brigade investigation at that time came to the conclusion that the ignition source was a computer monitor. And so could that have had something to do with the lead? Who knows? But from an insurer's perspective, we would say if we have an Australian standard that says you must do lead, test and tag and at a certain frequency, we would be looking to see that you're doing that. When we look at aged care facilities, sometimes they have residents' workshops where they bring in their own power tools, and then all of a sudden you've got this exposure of a grinder or a sander and an electrical shock exposure to a resident because it hasn't had the lead, test and tag. So without being the qualified electrician and knowing the in-depth ins and outs of it, we just see a test and tag program as being part of the overall maintenance and inspection program to reduce that. Thanks, Kurt. Let's go on. Legislation. This is just, again, pointing out to our brokers that we live in a federated arrangement. Every state and territory has a different rule. And if you're a property owner or an asset manager, you have to deal with that across all of the states and territories. And if, for example, you have an incident in a Western Australian site, you may not be able to rely on the fact that, well, New South Wales legislation told us to do this, so we were doing it for all of our sites, because the New South Wales legislation doesn't apply in Western Australia. So simply pointing out to our brokers that they have, and to you, that they have an obligation to understand all of the regulations under which they operate. And that's hard and it's difficult. And people like Jesse and myself don't know all of those regulations. But we would then say, well, go back to the appropriate person and find out. Go and see someone like Kurt or your regular electrician or whomever. Go to the expert. Thanks, Kurt. Safe Work New South Wales. Similar approach. Now, these screens here talk to lead, test and tag. Kurt, I think you asked a question about why we included AS 3760 instead of another standard. And I'm interested to understand your thoughts around this and the question reasoning.
Yeah, so 3760, which this screen actually denotes, is your frequency for testing your RCDs. So the RCD is the part within your building that's supposed to shut off before there's enough current applied to your body, should you be electrocuted, that'll stop your heart. So RCDs are hugely important. And that's why just recently across Australia, we went from now a standard to where power points had to be protected by an RCD to where now lighting circuits and all other circuits now have to be backed by an RCD. So they're vitally important for safety in any building. But once again, you've got 3760 denotes what you should test, but actually the standards on your frequency of test is actually backed up by 3019. So 3019 classifies different types of structures, and whatever your asset structure falls under, that's the frequency that you should be testing. One commercial building could be testing every 6 months, and that's totally fine by the law. The one right beside it could be every 3 months. And this is where one size does not fit all. You have to know what your regulatory requirements are, because should an incident happen in your premise, you will be investigated, and not knowing and saying, I didn't understand the regulations is not a way to, is not a defense, you know?
And that's absolutely right. And it's a basic premise of our law, which we, we've inherited from the English common law, that ignorance does not excuse. Yeah. Now, these references on the last two slides, I was really interested when you made that comment in the email yesterday around the standard 3019, because these references to 3760, I got off those government websites. And to me, the light bulb, sorry for the pun, the light bulb just came on, and it talks to the fact that this is also complicated, this regulatory path. And there are so many standards and codes and pieces of legislation involved. And nobody, unless they've got insomnia, is ever going to read AS 3000, the main electrical standard. And it's really, really complicated. And going back to that legal concept of ignorance does not excuse, I think it's incumbent on everyone in this process to thoroughly document what they've done, how they've done it, and so that if ever there was an inquiry by work cover or a court matter, a person could honestly say, I have done my level best to understand this, to follow the rules, and to document it.
Yeah.
And that was the key thing that came out of for me from this conversation. I'll be really honest, I'd never heard of AS 3019. Now we're going to go and have a look.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I mean, you go as an asset owner and you try to figure out the right things, or you even trust your electrician. So your electrical contractor is supposed to know all of this. The issue in the industry is, and always has been, is that the standards are changing. They're evolving, they're adapting, they're doing all these different things. It's a moving organism, and the states are trying to keep up with best safe practice, compliance. And what happens is that contractors sometimes get left behind because they don't keep up, or the electricians say, well, I've always done it this way and that's the way I'll always do it, which is not the case. And that's no defense as well. Even though you're trusting an electrician to do it through the Workplace Health and Safety Act, Section 5 on the PCBU rulings, and I think you talk about that in a minute anyway, Simon, is the fact that the directors of that building and the asset managers are directly responsible for all safety and all compliance on that site. And that is widely misunderstood commercially as well.
Yeah, and I agree. So on that note, let's move on. Look, these are just other examples. From an insurer's perspective, housekeeping around electrical apparatus is very important. And, it's really quite simple. If you do have an electrical short circuit or a small electrical fire, we do not want large amounts of combustible materials in that area, because that's what's going to drive the fire spread through the building and turn that small fire that could be controlled by the fire brigade into a total loss. So simple common sense applies here. Housekeeping, an electrical room is an electrical room. I'm sure Kurt would agree with us on that. It's not a storeroom for the gym equipment. It's not a storeroom for any other stuff you can't find another place for, because you're putting that combustible fire load into the area where you are likely to have fire originating. Thanks, Kurt. I'm not an expert on ingress protection, but I think we just simply go with the photo on the left. Are these people really doing the right thing? This was put in as a bit of tongue in cheek for our brokers, because many of those people would never have heard of ingress protection, water and dust protection on electrical apparatus. And we try not to talk to them in a very technical manner, but just to introduce a concept to them that if you have a wet area, you can't just use a normal PowerPoint, for example. or general power outlet. But we're not going to get into the technicalities of that because, again, Kurt will be all over me. Thanks, Kurt. Service penetrations, penetration of fire barriers. So if you go back to the National Construction Code, the old BCA, it'll tell you if you've got an electrical room with a 2-hour fire resistance level, those penetrations have to be sealed to 2-hour fire resistance. Why? Because fire can spread from fire compartment to fire compartment to fire compartment. And we've seen this historically, you know, including in large building fires. One, for example, was the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas many, many years ago, where, you know, fire down in the ground floors and the smoke rises up to the top of the building through the service penetrations, and you get fires breaking out in various areas. So again, this is really important from an insurance perspective, but it's actually in the book. It's in the National Construction Code. You have to do it. And I think, Kurt, on the next slide, we've got some examples of how you can do it. And we're not going to labour on these. The one I would like you all to think about is the photo on the right. Don't go down to Bunnings and buy a can of expandable foam. You might save a few dollars, but it's not a fire-rated sealant. It's just an expandable foam. Verification and testing. Look, there's, you know, these would be the things. We put this slide in to talk to our brokers around. These are simple things you should be starting a conversation with your owners or your insureds about. So we won't labour the point too much there, but each one of these points on the slide is important. Thermography, we strongly recommend it. All insurance companies strongly recommend it. I don't think you'd find an insurance company in this world that would say, we do not want our customers using thermography as an electrical inspection tool. It's really important and it's cheap. Kurt, what's your views on thermography?
Yeah, it's a vital part. I guess it's kind of like a puzzle piece to me. I mean, you've got your regulatory requirements and your regulated testing and the frequency of that and the oversight of that and the verification back to the standards. You got all these different pieces, and thermography to me just rounds out the entire picture because it's so much that QuickSafety has now teamed up with a Cat 4 thermography trainer. So he's internationally trained as high as you can get. And what they do is they train existing electricians or your existing people who are doing your thermography, if you are doing this process at the moment, in how to quickly and correctly interpret. So one of the things is I might look at that and say, oh yeah, you know, that looks very hot, but is it too hot, or is it a problem, or is it not? And you might look at it as an insurer and go, hey, yeah, that's a massive problem. But unless we interpret that properly, we have no idea. And that's what these guys specialize in. So they're an important part of the third process of what QuickSafety does, is to offer that availability to do the thermography, to do the training. And they do amazing stuff in thermography back across plant and equipment and buildings and power installations, everything. So it's vitally important.
It is, and it has many, many other applications these days. And look, I think your point about interpretation is really valid. We look to see that our insureds have a thermography routine in place. On occasion, we'll say, show me the report. But I'm not going to interpret that report and say, that's at 72 degrees, that's a problem. What I'm really looking for is the process, that you have the scan done, that you can show me a report, that you can show me actions to identify any issues have been rectified, that you can show that sign off to say, yes, we found a hotspot on board number 14, and here's our invoice from the electrician for $100 to say he's tightened the screw. So that's what we're really looking at, the management of it, not the actual test itself, because I couldn't interpret that if I tried, and I'm not licensed to. Thanks, Kurt. Let's go on. Electrical safety. This is something we talk to our brokers about, because as insurers, you'll understand we have many asset owners or landlords, some of whom may never set foot on the property that they own and tenant out. And yet it's our view that our brokers should be talking to those landlords and saying, you may be the owner, you may be distant, you may never have set foot on that shop in the Pilbara region, even though you're in Sydney, but you are a person conducting a business and you have obligations under that business, and you will fall into that legislation and you can't absolve yourself from that. So that's simply, the reason why we talk to our brokers around that. We want them to reinforce to their clients, everyone's got this obligation. No one is excluded from the legislation. Let's go on, Kurt. I think we're getting to the end somewhere. What are we talking about here? Electrical testing. I'm not going to labour the point on this, but it's complicated. And what person can do what electrical activity and what person can't, and who's got a license for this and who's got a license for that. Kurt can talk to us at length about that and with real expertise. But when I looked at it, I just thought this is incredibly complicated, and that's why we need to go back to the experts to get the right answers. Thoughts on that one, Kurt?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's once again, it's the regulations for that structure, for that building. It's the regulations within the states. We live in a federation, like you said, we live in a commonwealth. So each state has different nuances even with like the state legislation around certificates of compliance, or if you're in New South Wales, it's called a CCW, e-notices in other states. So there's all these different things. And as the asset owner, you really have to be informed about what you should be getting. I mean, this is the primary thing. If you want to indemnify yourself against any electrical incident or accident, you have to understand what you should be getting from your electricians on a daily basis. And I firmly believe that commercial customers are not getting what they need, which is why we started QuickSafety. I mean, we just want to make this entire process completely transparent from end to end.
Yeah, and I think it is, for all, it's a very, very baffling system that we live in. And look, I would say that, that just doesn't apply to, electrical systems. Some years ago, I did a review for somebody on dangerous goods, and at the end of it, I discovered there was around 140 pieces of legislation in Australia at the time that all touched on the storage and handling of dangerous goods. Now, I defy any business owner to find their way through a maze like that. But again, doesn't relieve us of that obligation. So these questions here were simple tips. I think, for us, have a think about those questions, challenge yourself on them. Are you really doing the right thing? Are you on top of it? That's the simple question. Am I on top of my electrical safety and compliance? And if I'm not, who do I go to get the right answers, and what can I do to get into that compliant state? Thanks, Kurt. And look, the 4 key takeaways, it's really quite simple. If we pay a little bit more attention to this, we can all play a part in driving down that loss rate from electrical ignition sources. Don't forget your statutory obligations. Thermal imaging, the insurance industry is very keen on it. We see it as necessary. What's the other ones there? I can barely read them. Jesse, help me out here.
All right, we've got inspection and maintenance to reduce losses and incidents, double adapters and extension cords, don't daisy chain, it's a bad idea. Be aware of your statutory obligations, know what you're in for, know what you're supposed to do, and scan your switchboards fees. Thermal imaging is such a bit of a cliched risk improvement advice from Simon and myself, but it's really good. It really, really works. And if you're working with your customers, ask them what you can do to help them to get on top of their electrical program. and don't be afraid to make suggestions on how they can do things differently. It's not always an easy, or sometimes it's an awkward conversation, but that's what you have the experts for, which I believe a lot of the people in our audience are. We have experts who can help guide their customers to do better effectively.
Thanks, Jesse. And look, I would make a simple comment around property owners. Now, Monday this week, I did a site inspection for a property owner, aged care facilities, and they have a number of aged care facilities across the eastern seaboard. And we know their management and maintenance regime intimately because we've been working with them for some years. And they have, for all of their sites, a requirement that a 2-year thermal scan be done, every 2 years, I should say. So talking to the maintenance manager at this facility, it's a simple question. When was your last 2-year scan? Blank look. Well, let's have a look at your maintenance schedule. Oh, it's not there. So what I'm saying is we can have all of the procedures and policies and corporate guidelines, all of this other stuff, but because we're human, things fall through the cracks. And in this instance, that maintenance activity, which is a corporate policy, had slipped off the maintenance schedule for this site. And again, what do we do about that? What do we know? Go back and check to make sure all of these essential maintenance and inspection activities are actually there. Make sure they're being done. Don't just assume that because somebody wrote your corporate policy 12 years ago that everything's still ticking along nicely. All right, Kurt, I think we're pretty much at the end. There's a couple of Zurich risk guides there that we're more than happy to provide through to Kurt if you like. But other than that, I just simply say thank you very much. We also at Zurich have a free app, Zurich Risk Advisor, available in iOS or Android. It's yours for free. Take it. You never know. It could be a simple tool that will help you. There's a few hints and tips in there. And of course, if you have any questions, you can send them through to Kurt, or I think Sandra's putting our names up on the chat box now. And that's me done, Kurt. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Wow, there's a lot of great information in there. And it even makes me want to ask questions as well. I mean, we have had talks over the months, but yeah, there's just so much to unpack. I mean, we could literally talk for hours and hours to try to get a comprehensive, not an in-depth, but just a comprehensive viewpoint of what's going on. So yeah, I think there's some questions that have been asked, and we'll now see what the viewers have said online. So I'll let Sandra introduce the questions, and then whoever can answer them, we'll have it a free-for-all. Okay, sounds good.
Here we go. We do have a few questions, but there's one in the Q&A box. New South Wales Resource Regulator considers thermography as live work, which is banned? ?
So that would be a me question. So I saw that question come in, and that was asked by a contractor, David. So David, glad to see you online. Thanks very much. I was trying to type in a reply to you, but I couldn't quite get it to work. So that's my bad. If you could give a bit of a reference to that. I know that I see we've got Greg Skyring online as well. So those of you who don't know Greg, he is the highest electrical official within Queensland. So he's the Electrical Safety Commissioner. So yeah, feel free to chime in whenever you want, Greg. If you want to mention something, raise your hand.
Yeah, if Greg's online, Simon and I can just log off, I think. Greg, you happy to take that from here, mate?
I can log off as well. We'll just let Greg
knowing that, I'm going back to my disclaimer at the beginning, Greg. Remember I said I know nothing?
Yeah, exactly.
My assumption would be, unless someone's able to chime in, would be that David's talking about high voltage work. So obviously you can't thermoscan on high voltage switchboards. And I mainly, unless Greg is able to chime in, my Only thing would be that when we recommend thermography, it's for low voltage work where you can safely open the switchboard and stand back and scan it. Whereas I believe with the high voltage, there's Simon or Kurt would know better, but there's some acoustic testing. There's a few other alternatives. Is that right?
And there's also, Jesse, there's also the availability now to do drone scanning. So now they scan thermography with drones, and who we've partnered with for that thermography section, this CAT4 international trainer, that's exactly what they do. So they use drones to do thermography scanning to take the actual risk factor of the people completely out of the equation.
Wow, fantastic.
Could I just add a comment on that? Because it prompts me to make one thing really clear. Insurance companies work to their own technical guidelines. So if I think about Zurich Insurance, our primary reference source around the world, and we have a team of 800 plus engineers, are the US NFPA codes. Now we have to adapt those, and we introduce some, we Australianize it or we New Zealandize it, whatever you want to call it. And we make these recommendations and have these discussions with our customers about what we would see as being insurance best practice. And if I understand this correctly, here's an example where we might say you should do thermographic scanning, and for various other reasons, you may not want to do that, or from a regulatory perspective, you are prohibited from doing that. So we come from a position of, we offer advice to protect the insurer and the insured. We're putting up the capital. But that advice should never be placed over and above a regulatory or a compliance or a safety requirement. And Peter's just put up about NFPA 70 and structured process. Well done, Peter. I hope you have a good time reading it. The point being, it's just another standard and code that we can reference and talk to, never at the expense of a local regulatory requirement. We're not in that game of saying, do what we tell you, and pushing a person into a position where they break the law.
Yeah.
Just on that, Simon, I just wanted, because that message went to the panelists and the attendees haven't seen it, Peter's comment was NFPA 70E has a structured process to address arc flash risk when conducting thermal imaging. So I'm just putting that into context with your response.
Yeah. No, I understand that. I didn't realise Peter G was on the call.
Yeah, we've got some great people that have signed up today and are actually live with us. We've got Regina Ruse. So Regina has spent a lifetime within Schneider Electric. So we've got probably the largest electrical provider globally. And I know that she's moved on to another position now, but when I met her, she was vice president of Australasia, Oceania, or one of those things for Schneider. So it's a pleasure to have Regina on here as well. So and several different contractors, which is fantastic.
Well, you already made us feel inadequate with the last person. It's okay. We totally get it.
Well, shall I move on to the next question that we've got here?
Yes, great.
Yeah. What do you feel is the most misunderstood part of electrical risk from an asset owner's perspective?
Probably that compliance equals safety, or that compliance equals good enough would be my feedback. Simon, Kurt?
I think a lot of people, and I think this comes back to the theme we've been talking about, this is a complicated area for many people. And for many hands-off landlords and property owners, they don't understand their obligations.
Yeah.
I think that's simply it in a nutshell. Would I sit here in front of all of you and say, I understand all of this? No. Would Kurt know everything about his industry? No, there's always things we can learn. So it all comes back to that. We don't know what we need to do on occasion, and we don't know where to go to get the right answers. Yeah.
Two great answers there. I guess I would add to that. is the point of, I hear a lot within different circles, is that asset owners generally think, oh, it's the electrician's problem, I don't have to worry about it. And that is simply not the case. I mean, you've got the Workplace Health and Safety Act that Simon mentioned, and the PCBU rulings out of Section 5 of that act. All these things are there. So if an incident happens, you can guarantee that the electrician, the contractor, your company, your directors, they'll all be facing court and be explaining what they've done to mitigate that risk in the first place, and whether they were negligible in actually doing that, and whether they are fined or lose their licenses in the case of electricians and contractors, whatever. It's a risk that I think that people really don't understand, and they always think it's somebody else's problem.
Definitely, yeah.
Great. I'll great answers. I'll move on to the next question. What are some of the common things that Zurich would require an asset owner to produce concerning their electrical maintenance and management program?
So we would like to see their maintenance logs. We look at the sorts of electrical maintenance inspection items that are on that log. Now that could be, again, levels of sophistication. For some people, it'll be a simple spreadsheet that sets out all of their maintenance activity. And this just doesn't go to electrical, it goes to plant and equipment and building. We want to see that there is a maintenance system in place. For larger customers, they'll go up to a computerized maintenance management system with asset management tracking and all of that sort of thing. But we want to see that there is attention being paid to understanding the risk, that there is attention being paid to managing that risk through inspection and maintenance. And we want to see that there are, reasonable records being maintained to support that. And I think, a simple example would be, once I was presented when I went on a site visit, here's our latest thermal scan, and it was a lovely book. It was about 1 inch thick, but not one of those activities or recommendations had been signed off.
Yeah.
So again, go back to my point. I don't interpret the thermal scan, but I want to see, and I don't consider myself as an auditor, but I want to see a process here that starts with identification of an issue, leading to resolution of an issue, and documentation along the way to support that.
That's great. I've got another question here, and I know I don't know how much longer we have with the Q&A, Kurt, but you mentioned that we can...
What we'll probably do, Sandra, I know there's more questions, but in the essence of time, and I know that one of my pet peeves is, webinars going longer than what they should. So I am going to run this webinar longer, but for the interest of closing out and doing the things we need to do at the end, we'll get one more question. I'll then do a closeout, but then we will stay online and answer those questions. So anybody who can and would like to stay on, please stay on after we do the close, because we will stay here for as long as it takes to answer all the questions.
Thanks, Kurt. So I'll go for one more here. This is a good one, I think. The latest figures are that 20% of all structure fires in Australia are caused by electrical fires. How do we prevent this from happening? What do you feel is the cause?
I think this goes a lot to what Simon was talking about. So we're not auditors, we're not there to confirm compliance, but particularly within Zurich, our job is it's asset conservation. We're there to help our customers protect their business assets, be it plant equipment, buildings, whatever. The big things that we see are, Simon's already mentioned, the thermographic scanning. If they're not doing it, that's obviously a big one, but particularly if they're not following up the actions afterwards, it's not much good having an inch long, 200-page report that you've not actioned. You need to have processes in place to make sure that if electrical problems are discovered, be it informally by your staff, formally through electrical contractors, through your preventative maintenance program, there should be a process to make sure they're being checked and acted upon and followed up. And I think there was a slide earlier on about the fire compartmentation, the separation within electrical switch rooms. How many times have we gone on site, Simon, where you have the penetration going from a switch room to another room, and instead of filling it with fireproof material, it's a polyurethane spray or your expansion foam, and that is just adding fire load. So I think there's a few things that are big problems, but usually it just boils down to a lack of awareness and a lack of formal process and self-checking. It's one of those things that should be in your electrical maintenance program, and it should be in your internal auditing and housekeeping processes. Is there anything you'd like to add there, Simon?
I think we brought out the key word, Jesse, and that is awareness. If you look back at some of those photos in our broker presentation, the electrical cords on the floor, the combustibles near the electrical, all of those things. Every one of those things you can tie back to the human mind, a lack of understanding, a lack of education. So are we talking through our society around why you would not store combustibles next to electrical? No. People like Jesse and I are left to have that conversation with people, but those mass audiences are never reached. You know, double adapters are not allowed in the workplace. I'll put my hand up, Mr. Electrical Inspector in Queensland, and say I've got a double adapter in my house. It's like the panel beater always has the dodgy car. The builder never has finished his extension on the back of the house. All of these things come to education, lack of awareness, time pressures. We're all too busy doing other things. I don't have time to worry about the electrical maintenance regime. I've got a factory to run. I've got to make widgets.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But one thing that I really am super proud of is the fact that Zurich takes the lead on trying to change and trying to inform a culture. And that's really what I want to applaud Zurich and you risk engineers in what you do, is that you're reminding people. You're actually there to not bash them over the head, but to say, have you looked at this? Have you had an audit? Have you had an electrical safety audit? And when was that done? And what were the results? And like Jesse said, have you completed the actual workload from those faults or failures from the safety exam? So all these things culminate to all of us working together. And that's really what it is. It's really all of us, from QuickSafety to Zurich to commercial, asset owners to, state regulatory groups, the ESO in Queensland with Greg Skyring as the Electrical Safety Commissioner, all working together, even the ETU membership groups, electricians and contractors working together to try to say, how can we maintain the standards to keep everybody safe and remove everybody's risk? And
it's almost too sorry, Kurt, after you, mate.
You're right. Go ahead.
No, after you, please.
So yeah, it's that sort of mentality that I think that we really, it's not that we're all siloed working in our own industries. We should be working together to provide the best possible solution in the 21st century, because one of the things Simon mentioned about was this paperwork log. Hello, this is the 21st century. There are digital solutions that you can have stuff stored, and your ramifications of how long you're supposed to store that. I could almost ask any commercial owner how long they're required to store that information, and they wouldn't really know, which is a failure on their lack of knowledge. And you were going to say, Jesse?
Yeah, no, and look, I will just quickly sidetrack what you've mentioned about asset owners not knowing where these records are stored. You were actually the person who taught me about our compliance requirements under the standard to maintain these records. I have asked a couple of customers since then, and the response is pretty well what you promised it would be, and it wasn't a good one. But that as an aside I was just thinking, it almost feels like the electrical stuff, it's almost too accessible. We all use electricity every day. We all use extension cords at home. We feel like we understand it. We would never take the faceplate off and start playing around with stuff because we're taught that that's scary. But because we're in a society where as soon as you speed, there's a speeding camera that tells you off straight away, or you get pulled over. There's this instant feedback that you've been naughty, you've done something wrong. Whereas if you're on a business site or at your home and you start daisy chaining these, the double adapters, because there's no instant feedback saying, no, don't do that, we feel like it's okay. And then we walk past that standard every day and it expands across the site. It's just that classic walking part. The standard, what is it? The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And I feel like that's very much a big factor in the electrical space.
And we normalize those behaviors.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
For sure. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. All right, quickly, I'm just going to, now everybody remember, I'm going to still stay on here. We're still going to ask the remaining questions. But I am going to just basically close off for those of you who have to go. I'm very mindful and I'm very thankful that everybody's joined us today for this hour, and I hope you've got something out of it. Well done to you all. It's an awesome presentation by Simon and Jesse, and wonderful questions from the public out there, from asset owners to contractors who just want to really be doing the right thing. So thank you all very much. We've got, if I can get my mouse working here. Here we go. So once again, I'd like to thank Zurich Insurance for lending us Simon and Jesse today. So thank you both very much. Really enjoy your company, enjoy your insight and your expertise in this area over years and years of experience. And if your business needs a helping hand with risk mitigation, please feel free to reach out to Simon and Jesse. You've got their emails, their information there in the chat window. So please reach out to them. If your business needs a hand with further understanding the federal and state requirements for your asset across Australia and New Zealand, please get in touch with QuickSafety. We also provide on-site external audit reviews. So it's an independent licensed certified auditor to ensure that your company is fully compliant and electrically safe. We can also assist you with your electrical testing and your frequency and your redundancy of electrical compliance within your asset. And also, as I mentioned before, that thermography section, which we just added. So if any of those are needed, please get in touch with me and my details will be in the chat window as well. And they're showing here, and Sandra would have posted the phone number to reach out. Feel free to give me a call at any stage. More than happy to discuss anything. And what we really want to do is to ensure that your life, your property, and your reputation is protected. So once again, I'd like to thank all of you who signed up and attended today's event. I really appreciate it. And hey, I told you I would spill the beans about our next webinar topic. So our next webinar topic is thermography. So here's the details here. And we talked about this, and it was just a coincidence. They didn't marry up this way, but that's just the way it was, because we know this is such a, once again, pardon the pun, but a hot topic within the industry, and one that's widely misunderstood. We've already proven, the pitfalls of it. So your company may be doing this, but there are people that are using it. Are they trained? Do they really know what to look for? Are they writing a report? Are they actually indemnifying your company? Or are you saying, oh yes, when Zurich shows up and does their audit, you go, yeah, here's our image. That's great. It's an image, but what does it mean? And what have you done about it if it means something bad? So, it's about reading it properly. And do you need training, certification, remote monitoring, external reporting? So that's something else we do, is we actually have certified people who make external reports on the thermography that your electricians or electrical contractors may have taken. They do aerial monitoring, and they do machine and plant monitoring. So there's a bunch of different things that they do within that. And we'll cover all of this next time on QuickSafety's webinar, just to ensure that you stay safe and stay compliant and stay out of court. So thanks everyone, for those of you who have to go, and we will now shoot back to the questions and continue on. Sandra?
Great. One more thing I'm also going to add is the online quiz that you also have on the website. Yes, exactly. Sorry. Thanks for that. That's why you have people like Sandra to keep people like me on track. Thank you very much, Sandra. Is the fact that we have a online quiz now. So it's for asset owners to take. So basically, it's a 30-second quiz. It probably take even less. But it'll just quiz your knowledge about what you're doing for the protection of your asset to keep it electrically safe. And it'll give you a score, and it will tell you whether you are at risk, whether you aren't at risk, or whatever. And then feel free to get in touch with me to discuss that. We can go over what you are doing, what you're not doing. If you want an external certified audit, we can provide that as well. So Sandra will put that link for that
quiz inside of the chat as well for people to go to.
Yep, it's already in the chat window. I'll move on to the next question. So we can get this going, and we've got some lovely comments already, by the way, to say that it was a lovely webinar, and thank you to all of you. So the next question is, do you feel test and tag is really a preventative measure for protecting a building?
Simon, would you like to dive in?
Well, again, I would refer back to that example of that large loss that I mentioned some years ago when I was at another insurer. The New South Wales Fire Brigade suspicion was that it was a monitor issue and related to what essentially a portable appliance that burnt down a $20 million factory. Do I personally think it's worthwhile? My son is a builder. He's out on construction sites every day. He has to do lead test and tag every 3 months. So this is not just about property protection, it's about keeping people like him alive, so they don't get an electrical shock. So yes, I think all of these things have merit, and they all form a tool in a toolkit, for want of a better word.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Kurt, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely right. I mean, we did a 6-month intro into Coles Express and Liquorland. So one of the things that they were looking at was by having a regulated, systemized, fully auditable, certified electrical maintenance system like QuickSafety, they, in the end, were looking at trying to remove the regulatory requirements for Coles, because you could imagine, I mean, even your son, Simon, who's a builder, I mean, that's a fair expense for every 3 months for every single tool.
Yep.
And thankfully now we have battery pack tools, which helps alleviate some of that, but still, there's a lot of leads that have to be tested and tagged and to keep up to compliance. And that industry totally agree with it. But Coles' approach was that if they can do this, they can convince the regulator. Now, my my initial thought was, wow, that could be possible. But my second thought was, good luck with that, because all these things are put in place for a reason, and test and tag is put in place to make sure that that cable that goes from the power outlet to whatever it be, a monitor, a printer, a freezer, whatever it is safe. The downfall with that is that it's only for that time. So when the electrician was there, and exactly then, 10 seconds later, something could happen to that lead and make it non-compliant.
Yeah.
Somebody could take and push up a cupboard against it and strip back the insulation, and now it's non-compliant. So it's just a snapshot in time saying, right now, everything's good. Which what we focus on is making sure that the circuit is integral, so that if something does happen and there's an electrocution happening, that the circuit will work like it should. And this is the whole thing. We've got, mine sites who have redundancy power supply systems for their mine. That's great if your power system fails. But what if the cable fails, which happens all the time, and which happens more as your cable gets older and older and older and starts to deteriorate? So that's what we focus on. We focus on the cable and the integrity of that circuit, and making sure that that is compliant all the time. And if there's a sharp deviation or degradation in that, we pick that up and alert you and say, hey, you better check this out, because even though it's still compliant, something's happened within that cable and the integrity of that cable to make this potentially dangerous.
You've both touched on something really interesting there. Oh, sorry, Sandra.
Oh, no. Yeah. I guess because there's a question that's just come in on the chat window that I thought sort of relates to what Kurt was saying. Did you want me to say that, or Jesse, did you?
Go for it. No, that's okay. Go for it. No. Let's put the questions first. That's brilliant.
How can asset owners protect themselves from dodgy products both electrical equipment, cables, LCDs, etc., and appliances. Often product failure is the cause of fire, not poor installation or maintenance.
Yeah, this is a massive thing within the industry, and it's one that the state regulators are really trying to get an oversight system on, because we live in the 21st century and we can just go on eBay and order anything we want from any country we want. We now have parts, processes, equipment coming into the country that may not and probably does not meet our electrical standards. And so therefore, it's hard, even as an electrician, when they're putting in RCDs or circuit breakers or cabling or whatever it is, to ensure that, hey, they're doing what they can do, but they're trusting that manufacturer's right. And they're trying to get an approval system. But you've got to think, I mean, there's bazillions of things that they would have to test, see, certify, mark on a database somewhere, or give them a stamp to be put on their products. That stamp can then be counterfeited and put on other products. It's a huge dilemma.
Yeah, it's sort of similar to, again, it's that control process. It's not, things are going to happen. You're not going to have never perfect site where nothing goes wrong, but it is critical to make sure you're managing your risk appropriately. And a part of that would be the simple stuff like, so you go to what's what I'm looking for? Effectively trusted suppliers and trusted brands. So only go for reputable companies. Yeah. And again, going through a reputable supplier slightly reduces the risk of you getting fraudulent or counterfeit versions of the brand you thought you were getting. But on top of that, sometimes there is room for a preventative maintenance program. Simon was talking about the aged care facility where they bring their drills in and any old piece of equipment is brought on for use on the site. A lot of aged care facilities will require that any appliance brought on site is actually tested and tagged, even if it's brand new. Often they'll give you a 12 months leeway, but a lot of the time they won't. It's a case of determining how important the asset is that you're installing. So it could be a really, really critical, really expensive new piece of plant and equipment. It's probably worth having a third party verify the installation after it's been put in to say, yep, we've checked it over, they've done a good job, you're safe. Or if it's less risky, but the consequences of going wrong are quite large, it's the same process. It's just understanding your risk and understanding what is best fits for your risk appetite or what the consequences will be. What I was going to touch on, and it's quite similar to what Simon and Kurt, you were talking about before, is making sure your maintenance is fit for purpose. You were talking about some places do the thermoscanning every 2 years, but Simon's son is a builder and has his stuff portable appliance and tested every 3 months. Was that right, Simon? Was it 3 monthly?
Yeah, that's what they're doing every 3 months.
Yeah, and that's probably influenced by the fact that it's building equipment. They're power tools that they're taking on site. They're getting stepped on. They're getting dropped. They're getting banged around. They're not getting treated quite as well as the monitor in the office probably is. And it's the same with the thermoscanning. If you have a site that has lots of vibration, could be lots of trucks coming in and out, lots of large, heavy equipment, a 12-month standard thermography scan may not be appropriate. You may have to do it 6 monthly because it's under a lot more stress. And it's just understanding what's the situation of your site is. There is no one size fits all. You really have to take compliance as a minimum standard and then improve upon that where appropriate.
And
you go ahead, Simon.
Sorry, Kurt, I was just going to say, I think, that's been reflected in Australia for many years, where we've moved away from prescriptive legislation to more risk-based legislation. But back to the question about the dodgy products or products that are not fit for purpose, I think for larger organisations, there's also something here in the procurement process. And I do have one customer that works in they have hazardous area classification, so they have dust explosion exposures, and they sought to buy some hazardous area rated vacuum cleaners, which I think cost them $10,000 each. And the engineering department specified a certain vacuum cleaner that was approved under the Australian standards, and through the procurement process, somebody went and bought other vacuum cleaners that were not approved. So you've got this internal problem of engineering saying we want product A, and procurement saying, but I can get product B for $5 less. And they now have a storeroom with all of these vacuum cleaners that they don't use.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. I mean, and along with that fit for purpose is, I mean, if we're talking electrically based equipment, you know, it brings to the forefront again the importance of your thermal imaging. Because if you do it regularly enough, it will pick up inconsistencies, and it will pick up a circuit breaker working harder than what it should, and therefore becoming hotter than what it should. So all these things are meant to work in conjunction with each other. But that fit for purpose one is one of the biggest hassles across the globe at the moment, because we live in a global society. One of the legal terms that they use when they take people to court is that you've taken every reasonable measure. And this is where they get people is in court in trouble, is because a person hasn't taken every reasonable measure. So they're not asking for the impossible, but you should be aware of what's out in the industry, and you should be taking every reasonable measure to make sure that your asset is safe.
We're all aware of the bathtub curve of issues. We see a brand new building has the most issues, and then over time, those issues peter off for the next 20 years. And then for the last 5 years of its life, you have a lot more issues again. And I feel like maintenance programs should reflect that. If you have a new piece of plant equipment, do a lot of checks and balances at the front end so that you can get it running smoothly sooner.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll move things along, because I guess these are such wonderful answers that you guys are giving. We could get lost into it. So the next question is, how are building owners supposed to keep up with all the regulations in the electrical industry?
Sounds like a Kurt problem to me.
But I think, you know, look, over the last hour or so, we have covered that point in some depth. It's really difficult to be on top of everything. But as Kurt just said, we all have that obligation to take all reasonable and practicable steps to be on top of this. And, you know, when you talk to the courts will look back and say, what were you doing? And if you can hold up a piece of paper which says, I have complied with this standard, with this code, with this act of parliament, with this piece of regulation, if you can substantiate all of that, then the court will say, or make a decision around, have you taken all reasonable and practicable steps?
Yeah, exactly. Great point.
Okay. And I guess, I don't know if this next question helps. It's like, what other standards exist?
Well, I think we talked about the big ones. I mean, the overall arching electrical safety Bible, as you call it, is your AS3000. So that's the electrical safety section that covers everything from cabling to testing to every specific thing that electricians and electrical contractors should know about. 3017 is actually the testing regime required by the contractors out of Section 8 of AS3000. So that's just a more in-depth section of the testing, the regulatory testing that has to happen when electricians are on your site. And this is probably something else that's not understood or made transparent, is that as an asset owner, you've got electricians coming and going out of your asset. And yeah, they've come in and added a new light or a new PowerPoint, or, you know, you put in a new office and they've wired it up. But what are you supposed to get? What do you need to get to indemnify yourself? What is that process? And this is where the system falls down, is because everybody's just thinking if something goes south, it's the electrician's fault. But then the issue is that if you've got 10 different contractors servicing your building, who was that electrician and who did they work for? So you've got a huge impossibility of trying to locate back to one electrician. But the Workplace Health and Safety Act is still going to take you down through the PCB ruling anyway. Another standard we mentioned was 3760, which is your RCD testing. So that's a regulatory RCD testing that should be happening on every commercial building. So if your building has people in it other than your family, it has to be tested every 6 months. So that's every commercial building, coffee shops, libraries, bookstores, the Telstra building, government buildings, anywhere to where there's going to be somebody other than your family, that has to be, all those RCDs have to be tested every 6 months. And that's the safety factor to prevent fatal electrocutions. So that's a massive one. And that regulatory requirement of how the frequency of that is all regulated by other standards that tell you what classification. So we go back into 3019, which then tells you what class of a building you are, and then what that is. And like Simon had said with the test and tag, once you go back in and you start looking at a commercial building, if you're looking at a construction building where it's just high, there's a high frequency, a high rate of potential for that going down, or a manufacturing facility, you're looking at dropping that to every 3 months. So there's those sort of standards. So that's the key ones off the top of my head that everyone should know about. But I think Simon alluded to it before. You can't be an industry expert in everything. I mean, I definitely am not. But I know who to go to lean on that. I mean, I just had another webinar this morning, an hour before this one, and I lean on these two guys for specific information because they're the experts. I have to understand the high level, the helicopter view of it, but I don't have to understand every detail. I have to be able to go to them to get that information and then utilize it in my business. And that's what asset owners should be looking for.
Absolutely agree with that. Absolutely
Definitely.
agree. We don't have to know everything. Our role is to help people find their own answers and to point them in the right direction.
Fantastic. We have. I bet you'll agree with me that we've got some great questions today in today's webinar. We've now just got a couple more left. So I'll just go through the second last question.
Sorry, Sandra, I might just dive in very quickly. Kurt, I'm so sorry. I do have to excuse myself and leave you and Simon to it. Thank you so much for having me today. I've really enjoyed this. I've very quickly just say I've been very grateful that we've been able to work alongside you last few months. It's very rare to find people as passionate and as knowledgeable as yourself in their industry. So that's been a huge benefit for myself and for the rest of the team. I will speak to you again soon. Thank you everyone for having me and best luck with the rest of the webinar. Take care.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Jesse. So just, second last question we have at the moment. Are there any companies that do electrical safety audits out there?
Kurt, I would simply, in this regard, we don't recommend companies, and this is not a question I could or would be prepared to answer. As I said before, what we simply do is we talk to our insureds about things where we see they can improve and then ask them to come up with their own solution. It becomes somewhat problematic for an insurer to recommend specific companies or organizations.
Yeah, totally agree. And I understand where, commercial entities, no matter what size or as global as Zurich take that stance. And I fully approve and appreciate that. From our perspective, I mean, we just want everyone to ensure that they're going to be protected. Everybody in that building is protected, that you're meeting your regulatory requirements so that you don't end up in court. You don't end up causing a huge fine or even jail time for your directors, for your health and safety people inside that building. And that your insurers, when they come around, like Simon and Jesse, when they come around to your establishment, no matter what insurer you use, when they come around and ask you these questions, that you will have that documented proof. You will be able to quickly and easily produce that and to do that. And so I mean, if your current insurer is not doing this for you, they're really doing you a disservice, because of the fact that they should be assisting you to be reminding you, because we're all so busy. They should be reminding you that, hey, we really need to do this. We really need to have this risk mitigation put in place. So as far as the original question with electrical audits, there are different companies out there that do one, but before you do one, first of all, understand what you really need. You know, it's like buying a car. I can buy a car from 1,000 different dealerships making 1,000 different makes and models. But if I really don't understand what I need, I can easily go to a dealer and buy a car that's not going to be fit for purpose. It's not going to solve my passion of reducing my risk. So just make sure and do your due diligence beforehand. Feel free to get a hold of us. We will help steer and direct you and give you a process out to where you can follow to make sure that whoever comes to inspect your premise is going to be doing the best thing for your company. They're not just there to give you an invoice and say, thank you very much and walk away, but it will be helpful and will mitigate your risk across your asset.
Thanks, Kurt. We've just got a new question that popped into the Q&A window here. As mentioned, a new building project has many problems. They get fixed, and after a long time, problems increase. Is it not more reasonable for the project department or company to issue a maintenance plans on handover of the project, since the project department or company bills the required standard to the operation and maintenance department, and then ops and maintenance to maintain and improve? This should be part of a normal project process.
Yeah, do you have any comments on that, Simon?
Look, I think in many areas it is. If I think about the building that I live in now, and I live in an apartment building in Sydney, and it's a strata building, and under the legislation there, we have to have a 10-year maintenance plan. You know, that's to protect property owners or occupiers like myself. That's protecting our asset. When you build a new commercial building, look, the large guys are doing this well. They know the asset life. They know the maintenance out over that time. The problem becomes, I think, for the smaller people in small to medium enterprise. They don't have the resources to do this. Smaller developers, let's get the building up, let's hand it off and move on. So it's like anything in life, it's not perfect. And again, we could all improve in these areas, but human behavior tells us it's also very difficult, and nothing is perfect.
Yeah, for sure. The interesting thing with that, and that question just got removed off there, Sandra, so I don't know if you can paste that back somewhere, because I wanted to address a couple of points in there.
Sure, if you just click on the answered section.
Oh,
we might
answered,
see
here
it
we
there.
go.
Yeah.
Of course.
I just
That's
moved it
what
there,
that
sorry.
means. That's what that means.
Yes.
So this is a classic example. And this is where the transparency in the industry has bothered me for decades. I mean, 40 plus years in and around this industry. And it just drives me crazy that you've got a new building being built. And I don't care whether it's a 4-bedroom home or, you know, number 1 Williams Street in Brisbane, okay? You know, a massive twin tower structure, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess it'll be number 2 Williams or whatever it is, because it's beside the state government building. But, you know, whatever size development is, that there are safety checks and standards electrically as they go along. So the electrical contractors will be doing 2 tests. They'll do what's called a dead test before they even put any power to that board on that floor in that building. And that tells them that things are safe, that when they put power in there, something's not going to blow up. So it's very important. Then they do the live test where they fit everything off. They come back and they do their final checks to make sure that it's integral. The circuit is integral. It's tested. It meets the regulatory requirements. and it's safe and it's fit for purpose. So that's essential. Now, what the person in the question asked is, now they do that internally, but then now that building has handed off. So let's just say that UGL Power built that building, and let's just say CV Services in Brisbane, which are large electrical contractors, did the design and install. So they now do this. Now that's handed over to a support and maintenance contractor. So now you have a new contractor that comes in to take over this massive building. So now the issue arises to where they have no knowledge of what happened before. They don't even have, they've got schematics and things like that, but they have no information or no access to these records. And that's what we solve. We solve the complete transparent process all the way from construction all the way to maintenance for however long you want to run maintenance out. And every circuit and every test on every circuit is within that single portal. And it clearly shows you the degradation of circuits, which is why now that we can predict and prevent power failures and faults, we can prevent electrocutions, we can prevent electrical fires, okay? So it's a great question, and one that not a lot of people are aware of, but once again, it depends on the adaptation of digital products nowadays to allow us to do that. Because at the moment, you've got two separate pieces of paper for the same circuit, more than likely stored in two different locations, supposedly for 7 years. And then you have a new contractor that comes in that's now putting all these other pieces of paper for that same circuit forever and a day. It's a crazy system. And that's what we do. That's one of the things, one of the many things that we solve here at QuickSafety. Are you there, Sandra? Oops.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I'm here. just the mute button. So I've got the last question here, and that is, if a PCBU is liable, how are we supposed to ensure the electricians are doing what they are doing, what they should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a comment about that. Do you have anything, Simon?
Look, I would, if a contractor is doing something, how, and the person conducting the business is responsible, how do we know they're doing the right thing? I think all insurers talk to their customers at length about contractor oversight.
Yeah.
And I just had an email this morning, incidentally, and it wasn't related to electrical. It was related to a hot work permit, where the organisation's hot work permit had the person responsible for issuing and signing off the permit could be a contractor. So here is a real failing in a system where the operator or owner of that business is handing off to the contractor and just saying, you can run the whole hot work permit thing. I've washed my hands off it. And I would simply say, again, we'll all spend our lives trying to understand all of these regulations. We'll never get that answer. But from an owner or building operator's perspective, maintain a reasonable and practicable level of oversight on your electrical contractors.
Yeah, totally agree. And this is back to the old age, decade mindset of people saying, not our problem. That's the electrician's problem. Yeah. And that is not the case, and never has been the case, but especially since February 2019, when the Workplace Health and Safety Act, Section 5, around PCBU rulings came into effect, it clearly federally brings that out now, that it is not the electrician's responsibility. You do have to have oversight over your contractors. And that is why the current system is broke, because that transparency just isn't there. I mean, I'm not here to bag electricians. I mean, I've worked in and around this industry for 40 plus years. My son is a hazardous area electrician. So I've got a passion for the industry, but even the electricians on the ground don't have the proper tools in their hand to ensure that compliance is being done. And that's what we wanted. That's another aspect of what we do. And what we wanted to solve is the formulations of the test requirements is complicated. And unless they carry around two separate tables out of the act in their pocket all the time and cross-reference exactly what they are for each and every cable test, they don't know. And our product, which is just simply an app that they use that tells them if it's compliant or not. But now we can make that transparent all the way to their boss, which is the electrical contractor, which the contractor wears the risk for every electrician that they employ. So if their electrician is doing bad testing or non-compliant testing, the contractor is responsible. So both of them go to court and have to give an explanation. Now, it's okay to make that transparent to the contractor, but what we do is we now make that transparent to the asset owner. So now the asset owner has a certified third-party software system that actually provides that complete compliance transparency from start to finish and solves all your regulatory issues. So that's the value in keeping up with technology. I mean, what we do, wasn't around 15, 20 years ago. And what we are going to do 10 years from now isn't around today. We're continually evolving and developing. But that's why it's important to have, like Simon said, oversight of your contractors. And that oversight isn't just saying, oh, are you a registered contractor? Okay, you must be good to go then. Because contractors want to do the right thing. Electricians want to do the right thing. But the actual pressure in this microorganism that we live in of the electrical industry is that there hasn't been that oversight for decades, like forever. So there hasn't been that oversight to ensure that everybody downstream has been doing their job. Now there is. So now asset owners can mandate the use of QuickSafety on their projects, and they fully know. Like I said, we have the only certified AS3000 3017 product on the entire planet. We're super proud of it. It's approved by every state electrical regulator. So now we can guarantee that those values coming from any electrician that you have on your site are compliant and that you have access to them and you can prevent power failures and losses, electrocutions, and electrical fires.
Thanks, Kurt. I guess those are all the questions. We did have a comment from Eric in regards to the project question to say that only way is to tie money to the handover. But he says thanks and well answered.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, Eric's right. Don't pay the bill until you get what you're supposed to get is basically what he's saying, which is a good principle, but you have to have the knowledge of what you're supposed to get. And this is why now a lot of commercial asset owners and a lot of organizations, and I can't physically name them at the moment, but they're looking at putting 7 simple requirements within their tender documentations that require them to do what they're federally required to do in the first place, but calling them out and saying, these are the 7 things you must do, and then providing a solution back to that if you win that tender. And it's a way to do the oversight, like Simon said, and it's a way that you can take and basically tie the final check down to that, because the system is automated. It does it for you. You don't have to do anything. You can go in there and look at it anytime, day or night, and ensure that everything within the property is safe. But very valid question is, yeah, if all else fails, just hold the money. So something will be produced, I can guarantee it.
Thanks, Kurt. Well, I guess that concludes the Q&A session, which was very, very good. And we had some great questions there. but they've all been answered. Thank you, everyone.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sandra, for that. And thanks once again, everybody, for your time and your patience, and especially for going so long. I think we could have went for hours and hours, but great questions, everybody. Thank you so much for putting your questions in there for us to answer. And if you have any further questions, feel free to send them through. You've got the email addresses and the like. And also remember, if you're a commercial asset owner, go take that quiz online and just see exactly how well protected you are. It's not a comprehensive one. It's just short and sharp and sweet to make you think and say, am I doing what I'm federally required to do within my state in Australia or New Zealand? So yeah, thanks very much for everybody joining. And thanks once again to Simon and Jesse. Invaluable experience. Do you want to have the closing words, Simon?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. Thank you for the opportunity to work with you on this. I hope we've brought a different perspective to you all, and wish you all a good day. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Bye now.